minute, I guess right now we just need to get an approval of the minutes from last time. If anybody wants to make a motion to do that. Let's see.
I will.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Rottenberg. A second for that?
I'll second.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hopper. All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes, unless anybody had any notes or anything, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions?
I abstain.
All right. Abstention for Mr. Rambo. Great. Okay. Travis, since I guess you're running the board here this evening, do we have anybody that would like to speak? I see we got Mr. Archeski tuned in. I don't know if he wanted to say anything.
Mr. Co-Chair, we did not receive any comments in writing, but as you just mentioned, Mr. Archeski is in attendance. If he would like to speak, if he would just use the raise hand or put something in the chat.
All right, awesome. Well, Mr. Archeski, of course, you're able to do that if you'd like. If not, you're more than welcome, obviously, just to listen to what we've got going on. All right, so first up, let's talk a little bit about what our top priorities should be for 2022. Joe, I don't know if you wanted to add anything into this or if we just kind of want to have it a little bit of a free-for-all sort of a deal.
Mr. Chair, I was just an interested listener tonight.
All right. All right. Well, I know obviously we've got some big plans in the works. We've got the survey going and some of the other permitting issues, but there are some things obviously we'd like to get figured out here. So does anybody have anything in particular they'd like to throw out to the group?
I have one question.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do we know what our absolute number one priority point would be in all of the erosion issues, the one thing that we would like to get fixed first, and what its approximate cost would be to fix?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a broad question, I guess.
No, it's a good one. I mean, I think that we've got, obviously we've got kind of a group. I don't know that we've ever really decided on an absolute most top priority. I mean, my assumption and the one that is discussed, I think the most is the triple meander, just because that one kind of affects up and down and also has the sort of, I think, the largest risk to infrastructure, I guess I would say. But I think, I think part of the approach that probably we're going to have to take with this is, the danger with assigning I think a number one to any one of those projects is if we had the ability to fix one of the other ones, then we would have to probably justify doing so. At least that's kind of how I feel about how we do other things on the council anyways. So I think our kind of group of, these are our handful of top ones, and whichever ones we can get to first, I think feels good, unless you guys disagree. I mean, I don't really have a dog in the fight, so to speak.
I would say, we've been, whether it's number 1, 2, or 3, right now, I've been thinking the triple meander is listed as number 1. We have been going over all of the upfront science, engineering, and et cetera, all of the upfront for almost 2.5 years now. And to me, is what we need to do now is to begin actual work of constructing one of these projects. We have the triple meander's been established, semi-engineered. I don't know how far degree the engineering is, and we have an estimate, but it's just a pre-construction estimate. And boy, it seems to me it would be so great to now start actually doing the work, except for one problem.
Right.
Requires millions of dollars. And of all people, for one, I don't know where this is coming from. I guess the only light at the end of the tunnel for money is what we might receive that's appropriate for use from the infrastructure bill. And how much is that's going to be and when that will ever arrive for use? I, for one, have no idea. So that's my 2 bits.
That's some good questions. Lauren, I see you got your hand up.
Yep, it was just an assessment and of any fiscal relief that we could have through the infrastructure bill and any applications that that we would need to do. My understanding from a municipal lecture that occurred that I was at before the bill passed, so there might have been some final editing. There was also a system of bonus grants that required a separate application, but could potentially have erosion money as well.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't follow everything the council does with bated breath, we did opt to engage with I don't know, what do we want to call a political consultant type person that's going to advocate for us in Jeff City. We were hopeful when we met with Senator Schatz a few weeks ago that we might get a little chunk of change, and I don't know that I would say that hope is lost, but I think that perhaps we're going to have to go a different route with trying to get that. I don't know that Senator Schatz is going to be all that helpful on that. Unless I'm misreading things. I don't. Mr. Ottenberg, get your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Question for Mr. Sturman. You mentioned the pre-construction estimate to fix the triple meander. What was that estimate? Do you have that figure at your fingertips?
About 1.3. Excuse me. About 1.3 million, as I recall.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, Mr. Vunich, do you kind of agree with that off the top of your head? 1.3?
Mr. Sturman, I actually looked at this last week for Steve Cross, our city administrator, and the Cox Creek triple meander is 2.8 million.
Close to 3. I mean, I think that's kind of the good and bad about that spot. It's the most prominent, certainly, and I think most easily visible if something were to get fixed in there, but it is also the most expensive and probably the most difficult thing to do. So, why not make it easy on ourselves? We'll just put the big one right in the middle and hope for the best, I guess.
I think it's probably also for the public in general, when they see that, it's one that probably jumps to the front of their mind and says, yes, this needs to be fixed pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, going around and looking at the different parts of our city that are having some issues there, I mean, there are many areas that don't look very good, but when you're talking about, I mean, I think, what do you think, Mr. Boonage? I think there's some of those bluffs have to be 30 or 40 feet tall with trees on top of them.
They're gigantic, and it's a combination of the erosion and the stream bank and the stream bed dropping as well. It's just, they're big.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I know that we do talk a lot about, and one of the questions I was going to throw in here as I was thinking about it today, I mean, the very real thing is, I think that as a task force, we're doing as much as we can possibly do in terms of engaging with engineers and getting pre-permits and now getting a lobbyist, I guess, for lack of a better word, to try to help us get the funding. But the fact is we're going to have to come up with some money here somewhere. I know that there wasn't a huge, if any really appetite in putting a levy, a tax, so to speak, on the ballot. And so, I mean, my worry is that we're going to wind up doing a lot of the science work, and we're spending a lot of time doing this. And I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get the amount of money that we need to get this thing happening. Unless there's some other creative force I can think of. I mean, we've got, several $100,000, I would say a couple $100,000 for the low end cost of fixing one of these to a couple million. And maybe we just need to take it slowly. I mean, that's kind of the direction perhaps we got to go. So, I mean, along those lines, we've tried, I know Mr. Sturman has done an incredible job trying to find money under every rock, and there, hopefully this infrastructure money will eventually show up, as everybody keeps saying that it might. but we'll have to try to get, in front of that and fight for it. I do think, I don't know if the rest of the council members on here agree, but I mean, now that we've got internet sort of really rolling down the hill here, that, the next most logical number one priority for the city is this. So it should theoretically be getting a lot more attention, I would think. What do you guys say?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, we always have the option of dipping into reserves if we need to combine to fill a gap, with
Yeah, I mean,
dollars we would
I've had that conversation a lot. I know certainly I don't know that there's anybody that would be overly excited to do that, but we had this conversation back when COVID hit, and I'm not sure what reserves are for unless it's to fix major issues like this. So, I mean, yes, sir.
I think this will bankrupt us, even if we spend all our reserves trying to fix the hot spots, and there are going to be more of them. And we don't have any confidence that the fixes that we've engineered are going to be adequate to the task going forward in the new climate regime. And so it's just a scary, scary problem. And I don't know that even thinking about spending reserve money unless it's kind of on stopgap measures is a workable approach, because the scale is, the scale of the problem far exceeds what we can come up with in reserve funds. And I know, I'm not telling anybody anything new at all, but we have to, maybe our time is best spent figuring out what can be done to mitigate some of these, problem areas, spend the money on the engineering, and then, kind of figure out where the money can come from, later on. It might have to be a tax, some sort of a bond issue, or it's going to have to be a major source of funding. And hopefully the infrastructure bill will provide, millions of dollars for this, but I don't know if this is on the radar screen for the folks that are drafting the latest version of the infrastructure bill at all. And so I know that's a dismal, message to be delivering here, and we all are aware of it, but I don't know about, I don't think there would be much traction with digging into reserves to try to fix 3 of these problems when we know we have 30. So it's just kind of a dismal, glass half full way of looking at things. But I think we need to have realistic expectations.
Mr. Sturman, you got your hand up?
Yes. Surely we in Wildwood, Missouri, in the country, can't be the only city that's dealing with this type of problem and is in need of money. Surely there are cities that I would like to think have found some money and is able to take care of erosion problems. Maybe even some others, and I don't know about the state of Missouri. I wonder if there's a way that, and I'd be glad to participate in the search and make contacts with other municipality cities that and managed to find the money and do this type of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems like a very logical step. I mean, I know I've driven past all the signs in Ladue of late that have, their storm water program or whatever they're calling it up, advertising they're getting those things fixed. So I think that, whether it's in Missouri or outside of Missouri, there's got to be some options there. And I agree. I think probably a lot of those options are that it's some kind of a tax, and that just might be the way that it's got to go. Mr. Rottenberg.
Yes, so I appreciate Council Member Rambo's concerns regarding the city reserves. He makes some very good points there. I guess what I was trying to zero in on is there something we can do now to fix what is probably the most glaring challenge we have, which is the triple meander. And I guess I have a concern that we have the figure of 2.8 million. I'm not sure when we came up with that figure. But with what we're seeing regarding inflation in construction materials, that figure could very quickly start to rise, and it could only become more challenging for us to try to find the funding to fix these problems down the road. I know that Mr. Sturman has background in the construction industry, so I guess I might ask him to just comment to see if I'm thinking along the right lines here regarding my concern over inflation.
In terms of materials, you were talking about moving soil around and soil, hauling it in or whatever, and rock. And then eventually, let's see, placing those boulders, buying boulders. What's happening to those types of civil, earthwork related materials? I don't know. But one big problem they're running into now that's not getting any better is labor problems, manpower. I don't know how these type of contractors are doing with that. I've heard some people having to put projects way, way off because of shortages of manpower for one. But to answer your question, Scott, I don't know. I guess I could go find out maybe what's happening to those type of materials.
I guess I'm thinking in particular of concrete that might be needed at various sections, that would be involved with that fix.
Oh yeah, some areas I guess we would need to buy ready mix or concrete. Now that I know has gone up a lot. I don't know if it's continuing to go up. I think before I retired, the last I checked, I was talking to some of my friends that that had almost doubled, at least doubled. And yeah, that's another good big
Our
item.
numbers were definitely before this inflation thing and everything kicked in.
Yeah.
Big time.
And I'm thinking the longer we wait, obviously the more of a challenge it's going to be to fix some of these areas.
I think you're absolutely right, Scott. Yeah.
Hang on one second, Ron. Mr. Berger, I see you got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to comment, we've got a fair bit of talk around the triple meander and how sites are prioritized. Just wanted to, put out a reminder that while the evergreen forest portion, I think, is maybe a little bit contentious given its location and whether or not, what funding looks like and how we're able to address that. But it's pretty immediately serious. And it's, I think, getting more so by the day. We've got the footings on our deck are now exposed. You talked about those big 30-foot, drop offs with trees on top of them. That's exactly going on behind my neighbor's yard. And that's going to come down at some time, and that's going to cause a lot of damage. So I just, would encourage everyone to maybe be thinking about, how we get some of this addressed before additional damage is done to either, life or property.
I agree. Mr. Rambo.
Yeah, this is this problem has really come on strong for a lot of communities in the last decade or two in the new climate regime, and what we're going out as Mr. Sturman suggested is a good thing to do because everybody's struggling with the same problem. And I don't know if any places have found solutions, but I bet it's going to come down to tax dollars. But in the meantime, we had a great idea. Mr. Sturman and Mr. Ottenberg both touched on this. We were going to get in some of these places and move the creek bed around. And that was sanctioned by our hydrologist, Dr. Hammer, as a good interim solution. And that would take, a bobcat, a big, skid steer machine, or a small skid steer machine. There's, 80 grand brand new, and then some sort of a track hoe. We couldn't get a big one in some of these creeks, but we can get a smaller one. And there are lots of little, independent operators that have a trailer, a track hoe, and a bobcat that they drive around and work by the day. And I would suggest that we kind of figure out, what kind of money we could spend on a pilot project and have somebody working all spring and all summer, just moving gravel around in our creeks. They could do it at the direction of some of our new hydrologists, or something like that. It doesn't have to be a big contractor. It just has to be someone tasked with shoring up the erosion problems with the existing creek bed. It seemed like a powerful idea, and we haven't lost sight of that, but we haven't tried to drive forward with that, sort of conceptually. And so I'd like to discuss that, unless I'm the only one thinking that's a good idea.
I think it's a great idea.
Especially for an interim project, which would be much smaller. I think you're right on.
Yeah, those guys it's like $1,000 a day.
Yeah.
For an 8-hour day, they come and they've got both machines and they jump back and forth from one to the other, scooping and moving and scooping and moving. And, for $20,000 for a month, they could do some serious work in those creeks for that kind of a figure. And I strongly suggest we, come up with a pilot program, because I myself know 3 or 4 little tiny operators, and probably this group knows 10. So I think it's worth consideration.
Rick Brown, I see you waving your hand down there.
Well, I just wanted to make a couple comments on that idea. I've kind of held my tongue previously when it came up, but I think if you want to explore that idea, I wanted to point out that it certainly would be a less cost alternative, but it still does require some engineering and permitting to get that done. So to go down in the channel and start changing and moving the channel, reshaping it, would require permits from the federal government. It requires frankly a city floodplain development permit as well. And to get those permits, you've got to do some hydraulic modeling. So plans have to be drawn up to show the changes in the channel. That's going to require some survey work to be done. Unfortunately, it's really not a real quick fix. I mean, it could be done, but there is some engineering that has to be done on the front end to get the permits from the federal government and frankly, the floodplain development permit through the city to authorize that work. And keep in mind as well, you're working on private property. So you're going to have to get an easement to get down there and do that work, unless it's in an area that we already own it. So there is some effort there that needs to be done.
I hear you, Rick, but when it comes to time element, these permits of this type of work takes a long time. With all the entities we've got to go through, I was under the impression some time ago that we had started applications for permits. Am I right or wrong about that? I guess that was for the big fix, not an interim fix, like the triple meander, for an example.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yep. Mr. Hopper, I see you get your hand up.
Yeah, a couple things, I guess. I guess tying on a little bit, I think a little bit in the spirit of the idea that Councilman Rambo had said, but it seems to me there's some of these really big projects that frankly, they're going to be millions of dollars that we're going to have to figure out some funding issues to even start to begin to tackle. But I think the key thing now would, determine if we have any funds, whatever to spend, and maybe tackle some of the low hanging fruit, so to speak, or some of the smaller projects where we can start to make a little bit of a dent, get a few wins in, I guess. But what we have to start trying to make some progress while we work on these larger funds, because otherwise we are just going to continue to meet every month and talk about how we don't have money and we'd love to do this stuff, but we still don't have money. And at that point, what's the purpose of this task force if we're just going to sit here and stare at each other on a screen for stuff that we can't do? And doing some of those, more easily attainable projects that are more reasonably from a financial standpoint, and gives us some time to kind of figure out where that larger funding would potentially come from, and some of the other things to do, but at least try to start making some headway. I would assume that, while we have these big projects that would make a huge impact, I would assume that we still have some smaller projects we could do that would still help ease the pain a little bit until we can figure out where those larger projects come into play. But I'm not a hydrologist or anything to place my expertise there, but and also would, in my opinion, give us some time to continue with an education campaign for residents, because I would guarantee there's residents that see it every day and are concerned about it, and there's a lot of residents who probably have never thought about it in the number of years they've lived here and still don't think about watershed erosion and what it's doing to the community. So I think there's a few options there that sort of hits a few potential points for us, but I think getting too laser focused on these big projects will continue to sit and spin our wheels for however long we can until we look at something else.
Well, and those little ones are also, as you said, it's a great way to test some of our theories and get some wins under our belt to know that when we do have to invest the, $3 to $5 million, whatever it's going to wind up being there for some of the bigger projects, it's not just like, boy, we really hope that this works. We think it might, but we'll see. So I like that plan. Ms. Donaldson.
Well, I was just as we've been talking. Mr. Hopper took the words right out of my mouth. What I was thinking. As we meet, we continue to talk about these projects. So my first question is, are there any funds for any of this? And secondly, myself as a taxpayer, if I'm unaware of what is going on, but I become aware, and then I see some of these smaller projects being accomplished, and that there's a strong effort and achievement of getting some grants, et cetera, I would be more open to having a tax levied to save the city of Wildwood from some serious issues. Now, I come from a situation where I lived in Eureka for 20 years and I didn't see flooding until 2015. And when I saw it, it was horrifying. So when you become aware of it, it is very frightening. And I saw a lot of properties ruined. So that we keep coming back to that. There's no money, but the clock is ticking and ticking. And I really believe people are going to start losing their properties from what I've seen. So I think that's really the battle, is getting, where do we get those funds? I don't know what the answer is, but we keep on meeting and we keep coming up against that. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is there's not a huge amount of funds. I mean, we are authorizing as what I would say is probably as much as we can to get the permits going and the studies and things like that. But the repair funds are difficult to come by for sure. Steve, I see you got your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Sorry, I joined a little bit late. But right when I got on, obviously you all are talking about funds. I want to, there's a couple things that are going on. Some of you may know that the city recently engaged the services of a political consultant in Jeff City. His name is Jake Silverman, and the city hired this gentleman. And this gentleman has hit the ground running. He had sent me an email end of last week, looking for what are the city's priorities. One of which, obviously, a big one is watershed erosion. So we identified for him the top, I think, 6 projects that this task force has identified, as well as, as the bigger picture in terms of all the watersheds, not just a couple. He is already approaching some of the committees in Jeff City as we speak in terms of trying to acquire some funding. And this, because there is money available at the state level for these kinds of things right now. And so we have a gentleman now that is lobbying, if you will, on our behalf. And so we are hopeful because this is a gentleman who is a real go-getter and has lots of contacts in Jeff City. So he's working that. So we may see some funds out of that sooner rather than later, hopefully. I mean, that was the whole reason that we hired him. And that is independent of anything that comes from the federal government in terms of an infrastructure. And I think we're getting closer and closer where all the municipalities are going to see some money. But I did want to make sure that you all were aware that we now have a consultant in Jeff City this is one of his top priorities, is trying to get money, because we've already solved the internet problem. This is number 2, and he's working on this one. It's pretty much kind of his full-time thing right now. So keep your fingers crossed. Maybe something will come out of it sooner rather than later. Thank you, Mr. Farmer.
Yep. Mr. Rambo.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to and beat a dead horse here for just a second. What Mr. Hopper and Ms. Donaldson said make good sense. Trying to do what we can to fix the smaller problems. It's still a matter of us doing what's possible. And we can get I still think we can get a lot of bang for the buck with the moving creek gravel around. But I've done a couple of creek projects myself with DNR involvement, and I had to draw up the plans, what I was trying to do, and got an approval. I don't even know that it cost me any money. It might cost a few bucks. And a city permit, I had to put a deposit down, and it was trivial sum. And I got $1,000 back, after the work was completed. It was a very straightforward process. We have hydrologists that are sort of semi-captive. They would, I'm sure, charge for their work, but this seems like a, relatively straightforward design process. And we might have to pay for some surveyors, but all told, even if that triples the cost from 20 grand for a month worth of work to 60 grand, it's still a pilot project, and it's still cheap in the great scheme of things. And we can fix some of these smaller problems and gain some knowledge of how to go about fixing the larger ones. And so I don't understand, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't understand why it's not worth pursuing that unless it's burdensome to the city staff or something like that. And I understand all that, but I guess it's a question for Rick Brown. Rick, could you enlighten me a little bit more? Because maybe I'm thinking that this would be more useful than it is, but I think I'm missing something. That's a question for you, Rick. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess what is the question specifically?
Question is, why is this not worth pursuing, even if we have to pay for some hydrology work and for some survey work and whatever the DNR permits cost? Is it just DNR with larger scale projects? Is it a nightmare? Because I didn't find it to be so with my smaller projects that I've run through DNR. So,
well, as far as the engineering effort, I wouldn't categorize it as being a nightmare. It is just it is work that needs to be done to get the permit, because again, the Cox Creek is a floodplain that's in the national floodplain.
Yeah, I'm talking. I wasn't talking about the triple meander even from the beginning. I didn't explicitly state it strongly enough, but I was talking about smaller projects where we can actually do some good by moving some creek bed around, not trying to fix our biggest problem with a guy on a little backhoe or something. That's probably not going to work. So I'm talking about smaller, more straightforward projects that can actually do some good, even if it comes at a cost of some engineering and somebody has to run the rabbits for the DNR and the permitting processes and so forth. But it doesn't seem excessively labor intensive or burdensome. And it's worth establishing a pilot project and see how it goes. That was my concept.
And that could be done. We'd have to engage an engineer with that task and then start that process. Engineer could quote a fee to do the engineering and to put the plan together, and then we'd have to acquire easements as well. There'd be need to appraise the cost of the easement, contact property owner, and work through that, or see if they would donate the easement to the city. It's just
so I can't imagine them not doing that. It might be tougher in evergreen forest or something when there's 20 backyards involved. But like, for example, for me, you can work on a half mile of creek, and I'd sign permission tomorrow. And so I don't think there's be resistance from homeowners necessarily if they're the one losing the topsoil, and so that part doesn't scare me. That's just an effort to make the phone calls and so forth, which, it's easy for me to say because I'm not on city staff, but I think it's worth the committee talking about a pilot project of just that sort and, see if we can do some good.
I think when this has come up before, and it has been over time, I've had proposals for property owners to do this very thing. And every time I've brought it up with engineers that work in the field, they've really discouraged the idea, just because, you are going to spend money for an improvement, but you really don't know the length of the time that improvement's going to be in place. There is, with that magnitude of work, there is going to be a storm in the future at some point that'll probably wash that improvement downstream. So that's the concern with it. You're going to spend, you know, $10,000, $20,000, $40,000, whatever that number is. And then it could be the next storm the following week is a 200-year storm, and that improvement literally washes downstream. And that's why I've always heard from legitimate engineers, they just discourage that practice, generally speaking. I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but there is a risk that it's not going to last. It's not going to last for 100 years. It may last for a week. It may last for 10 years. You just don't know.
Well, that's what temporary means, but it sounds as though, well, there's no guarantee that any of these fixes are going to stand the test of time. And it was suggested by a qualified hydrologist that it was a way for us to buy 2 to 5 years on some of these places. It sounds as though there's not much support for the idea, so I'll shut up. But I still think it probably has some legs in certain areas.
Mr. Ottenberg.
Yes, thank you. So Mr. Brown, tagging on to Councilmember Rambo's question, just off the top of your head, we're not going to hold you to this, but if we were to go down the route that Mr. Rambo is suggesting, how long would it take to get the permits, to get the surveying done, to line everything up, to engage in some of these, I guess I'll call them, for lack of a better term, temporary fixes?
Well, we certainly have to go through the process of engaging an engineer, bringing them on board and getting that approval through city council. Once we had that underway, then you've got to do the survey work, put a plan together, do the hydraulic modeling, then follow that up with Corps of Engineers to get the permit, and then potentially iron out any easement acquisition with property owners. So I would think you'd be looking at probably 4 to 6 months after you got an engineer under contract to do that kind of work. So it would take a while to do it. It certainly would not be as long as the permanent fix, say, for some of these areas, but it would take some time to get through that.
All right, thank you.
Guys, a follow-up question, please.
Sure.
Yeah. So a good bit of the engineering and survey work wouldn't be wasted, though, would it, Rick? I mean, couldn't we, just kind of work ahead on the engineering phases of some of these larger projects, and then it might be a separate permit for the gravel rearrangement as opposed to a permanent fix, but it's a fraction of the cost, and it seems like a way to take a step forward. Am I all wet on that?
No, and that's actually not a bad point, because depending on where you focus your efforts, if it was within an area that we were looking at the permanent fix, yes, I think that engineering work, that survey work would be applicable. So you'd have that as a basis of the permanent fix if that's the direction we went subsequently. So it wouldn't be considered a complete waste of money by any stretch from the engineering side. I would agree with that.
Okay. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The bed load relocation and the reestablishment, let's say, of the main channel is one kind of temporary short-term fix. The other that's been discussed by the task force has been retrofitting some of the key or critical detention retention basins that were constructed at the old MSD standard, and obviously not a good standard compared to today. Maybe the advantage to considering that as an immediate project is, first and foremost, we're dealing generally with the homeowners association, not multiple property owners. Secondly, people see what we're doing because it's in a neighborhood. And thirdly, based upon Joe Wilson and Todd Wagner, there is substantial storage capacity that could be gained by a retrofit, which would hold water longer and not discharge it as quickly into the system of ephemeral drainage ways and creeks. So that's an option for consideration by the task force as well. And then finally, I think the estimate that was provided by Todd Wagner was that the retrofits could range somewhere between $1 and $2 million, so substantially less than let's say some of the other projects that we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlesmeyer.
Thank you. I guess going back to the riverbed adjustments, and I guess this is more just a blanket question because I don't know if anyone here can answer it. It'd be probably more one for an engineer. Is that to assess some of these critical issue areas we have, like the triple meander, to ask almost if we do a riverbed adjustments, like we've been discussing, could it save us some time? Because seems to be the biggest issue we have right here, is that we have these major projects that we just don't have the funding for right now. So we're talking long distance time frame to either collect the money or even just figure out how we gain the money. If we spend a minor amount of money on adjusting, can it delay further erosion to prolong our time frame? Because another thing we have to account for is, yes, we're saying it's almost 3 million for, let's say, the triple Miranda section, but if we wait 2 years and it erodes out, it could be 5 million, and all of a sudden we don't have the money for it because we've been accounting for 3 million. So I don't know if anyone here can answer it. A more question possibly for engineers, is it a possibility to delay further erosion to help us collect the money we need for these projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be a great question to just bounce off of our consultants, because I mean, certainly I have to imagine doing something, even something small, has to be better than nothing, I would think. So yeah. Mr. Lanty.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm new to this, so I'm just doing a lot of listening. My first question has to do with when we talk about engineering and permits and so on. Has the direction for how that works been decided? Has that been approved? Is that money that we know at the moment is available to at least get started? It seems to me that conversation about getting something started really had something to do with what can we expect. And I don't know whether that's city money or reserve money or whatever, some of the things that you've talked about. But in order to even do any small project, as Mr. Rambo suggested, something has to be done about upfront. What exactly do we have available to do anything? And I just don't know the answer to that question.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know, Joe, if you or Steve want to take it, or I mean, the general answer would be that we do have permitting moving forward. We did approve that. We've approved a pretty good chunk of money to go to the USGS for a kind of 2-year geological survey, so that we can get hopefully an idea that the fixes that we're looking at are certainly not going to cause deeper problems, and hopefully will obviously solve many of the issues that we've got going on. I don't know, Joe or Steve, do you guys want to add anything to that?
Joe, you may be looking at the budget, but based on the money that we've allocated for USGS, I'm not sure there's a whole lot left over in your budget for a lot of other stuff that's been allocated for this particular project. Do you agree?
Steve, you're correct. In 2022, capital improvements program monies available for the Watershed Erosion Task Force is about $250,000. Our first year commitment to USGS for the study is about $107,000. So obviously we still have about $140,000 to utilize this year for priority projects, whether that be the bed load, detention retention basins, or the actual design and engineering of the repairs to the critical locations, that being, again, the triple meander, the detention basin at Anniversary Park, Evergreen Forest Court, and then finally the Highlands at Wild Horse.
Let's see. Ms. Donaldson.
Well, just a question about, Joe brought this up momentarily, about the retention and detention ponds that are in the subdivisions that are the older MSD standards. Who would pay for that potentially? Would it be an HOA assessment, or would that be paid for by the city to improve those, to slow some of that water down in large storms?
Mr. Chair, with your permission.
Yep.
I think it'd be a hard sell, Ms. Donaldson, to ask the homeowners association to pay for the retrofit. I think what I would suggest, if it was something that we would consider, is first just negotiating with them to gain easement rights or access rights so we can do the work, have them then maintain it once it's complete. But ultimately, we would probably be paying for the actual improvement.
Any thoughts on cost to do that, or is that really an unknown?
Well, again, Wilson Hydro, our consultant, Joe Wilson and Todd Wagner, they put the cost to do, I think, some priority detention bases. I don't know the exact number, but it was somewhere between $1 and $2 million. But you would, for the collective bunch.
Oh, okay.
So to speak. Yeah, not just for a single one.
Yeah, I think that was over, what was it, like 13 or 15, something like that.
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Rambo.
Yeah, Ms. Donaldson actually asked the question I was going to ask, but it sounds as though I had honestly forgotten about the retention and detention basins and that work and whatnot, but that might be our best bang for the buck. It's highly visible. It's relatively straightforward, and it will retain a lot of water upstream. And rather than doing what Mr. Brown sort of advocates against, which is moving stream bed load around, it might be a an easier path of attack. So I don't know if we could get started with the 140 grand that Joe's still got in his budget, but maybe it's a sensible thing to consider, trying to work toward cleaning out some of those and scooping out and enlarging some of those detention ponds in 2022.
Not a bad plan. Mr. Bartlesmeyer.
Yeah, just basically listening to the conversation we're going here. Well, first I'll start off. I know someone mentioned something about possibly use the money we have, and I think it was actually Mr. Cross, about applying that money towards engineering. I just wanted to say, at least my perspective, I don't know if paying for engineering for final solutions is the best idea at the moment. If we have no idea when the project would take place, I think the last thing we'd want to do is spend a lot of money on engineering for an issue that may deteriorate more in the time frame it takes for us to gain money, and that engineering basically becomes obsolete and has to be re-engineered because the problem has worsened. Just basically off the discussion we've had now, I'm talking about the money issues we've been talking about pricing for these things. I think, in my opinion, the best course of action would be prevention at this point. Spend whatever we can on preventing the problems from getting any worse than they are, while we try to hunt down ways to pay for the major issues.
Rick, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I am clearly biased because I am an engineer, so I will say that up front. But Steve Cross mentioned that there may be some money available. I have this feeling there is going to be money available for infrastructure projects. And the best thing you can do is to be prepared for it. And in my mind, one of the best things we could do, and I'm saying completely the contrary, would be to spend money on engineering and get the plans started or further down the road, maybe not finished, but at least close enough that you could be ready to pull the trigger on a project when that money is available. So I think there's a lot of value to trying to do some engineering and getting a project ready or close to ready so that when that money is available, you can jump on it and you've got a clearly defined project, you have a firm cost in mind, and you can take advantage of that opportunity because it may not last. So I just want to throw that out because there could be an opportunity where you start on the triple meander, maybe hire the engineer to start the design of it, maybe look at a short-term solution at the same time. But start down that road and get half your, 50% progress on your plans. And then if the funding doesn't become available, maybe you stop right there, but maybe you've got a green light on funding and you finish it up. So that's my perspective as an engineer.
All right, Carol.
First, apologies for being calendar challenged. Secondly, I would echo a little bit of what Rick said about proceeding with engineering, with the additional twist of what we really set out there as our objective was getting the permits, which can be a very complex, long process. And once we get those permits, your point's well taken that if conditions change, some of that engineering might have to be redone, but the permit itself is good for like 5 years. So, we're just trying to get to that point where if money becomes available, and even to answer the question realistically, what are these things going to cost? You can't, for a long time, we were in this kind of chicken of an egg. We were trying to raise money to fund things that we didn't have a budget for. And that's real difficult too. So I think we're trying to find that delicate balance between we've got the permit, we have a good handle on what it's likely to cost. And, all that can come together once, we have identified a realistic funding strategy. The other on retention basins, the $1 to $2 million, I do kind of remember as sort of the total. But we were talking, in my recollection, it was tens of thousands per detention basin. So you could start, I think prioritizing pretty easily, upstream of the triple meander, high, volume, big volume, and maybe add as a third criteria what kind of elevation is draining down into it. So how much energy the water has when it arrives there. And, even if, again, I think there'd be a lot of visibility, and I think it does get at the root cause in a way that, moving bed load around, is mitigating a problem, but not really going back to, reducing it on, in the future. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of merit.
All right. Mr. Cross.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out another avenue that we are pursuing with regards to funding. Back before the holidays hit, we had Senator Schatz come to Wildwood, and Mayor Bolin, myself, Ms. Holthouse, Mr. Farmer, Mr. Vunich met with him and had a quite lengthy discussion in terms of, and this gentleman, by the way, Senator Schatz, is head of the Senate. So he wields a lot of power in Jeff City. We presented to him, and your co-chairs did an excellent job in presenting the issues that the city is faced with regards to erosion. We weren't able to get, so he went back pretty well armed with what the issues were. The holidays hit. We couldn't get anything done until the session started again. So they have been in session now for about 2 weeks. I've made a note to myself. I am going to ask tomorrow, send an email to our political consultant to get with Mr. Schatz, who made a commitment to the city that there is some money to be had, and he would try to come up with, $500,000 to $1 million. And he thought that was a doable thing. So I'm going to see if maybe we can, between the city and our political consultant, if we can't squeeze that money out of his hands and get that. So we've got another avenue and like I say, he made a commitment to the mayor and to the rest of us there in that meeting that he thought it was pretty easy to come up with that kind of money. So we'll see, but I just wanted you all to know that we are working, trying to find funding in Jeff City from a couple different angles.
Rob.
Yeah, I had some things to say, but Ms. Holthouse said virtually all of them. So I'll just say that I'm a different kind of engineer, but there's still an engineering bro code. And I want to reinforce what Mr. Brown had to say about the value of getting the engineering done ahead of time. And we could jump on and move a little gravel around, as soon as we got the permit, and while we're waiting for the permanent fix and do some good. But I do think overall, the more I think about it, the more it makes sense to try our best to work toward enlarging the upstream detention ponds as a first on kind of a project, because it seems like a whole lot of bang for the buck. So I'd like to see us just figure out how to move forward along that path. That's it.
All right, Mr. Sturman.
Back to the triple meander. We, if we were to pursue that, I'm not pushing, but if we were to pursue that, I'm under the understanding that Wilson has done enough engineering, and I don't know how far they've went to be close to construction documents that you can get a permit on, except a permitted process seems to be in this world a little different than I'm used to. I would wonder how far they go and how much farther they got to go to complete the engineering ready for construction. I'm also under the impression we had started applying for permits. And I don't know when we started or if we know how much more time it takes to get a full permit, say for the triple meander, where we stand with that. And it's nice to hear if, boy, Mr. Senator Schatz can start out with $500,000 or more for us. And then do we have any idea at all or how much we will be getting from the infrastructure bill? So what I'm saying is frame this whole thing up to try to put together a schedule for this overall thing that could lead to actually starting such as the triple meander project, because it seems to me that's the one we've done the most work all the way around on that project. And I don't know, Mr. Brown or Mr. Crawl or anybody, if you have any ideas.
Steve, I see your hand up there.
Thank you. Two things. Number one, I forgot to mention in our conversation with Mr. Schatz, Senator Schatz, it was discussed that the further down the road we are, the closer we are to being shovel ready on a project, the easier it will be for him to obtain funding. So when we're ready to rock and roll, that'll put us ahead of other people that are clamoring for that same dollar. So that was discussed with him. Mr. Sturman, in terms of how much the city might get, should there be another tranche of funding coming from the federal government, when President Biden is talking, $1 trillion or whatever, at this point, no, we have absolutely no idea. There is still ARPA money left over. We have allocated our portion, the city's portion, for internet, but but there is money that the state has. And in fact, I sent an email to Mr. Vunich and Mr. Brown today because I received an email from the Metro League of St. Louis saying that there is money at the county level and the state, and if cities want to partner up with them to get some of those ARPA monies that have not been spent and allocated. So we're going to look into that. But in terms of an infrastructure bill, how that would flow from the Treasury to the state and then ultimately to the city of Wildwood, at this point, it's way too early to tell what that might look like. Sorry, Mr. Sturman, bad news, but we just don't know. Nothing. It's still in Washington, D.C. right now.
Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to Mr. Sturman's question, Mr. Wilson and Mr. Wagner, who are doing the preliminary permitting with the Corps, they began their work, I want to say around mid-October, late October. So it's underway. And Mr. Wilson did provide to the city late last week a cost estimate for the design, engineering, and bidding components for the triple meander, the detention basin by Anniversary Park, and Evergreen Forest Court. The total amount was $426,000 for that work.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've talked a lot about our priorities and things like that. Does anybody have any thoughts on what we could do to make our task force more effective? I mean, I think we came up with some good ideas in terms of come up with a few actionable plans. That would be the most effective way I can think of, but is there anything else anybody would like to throw out there? If not, that's totally fine. All right. What about with our residents? What can we help them or communicate to them that they can do, do a better job? I know we talked about doing, see, Nathan, I'm sorry, Nathan, I saw your hand pop up. What would you like to throw out there?
Sorry, that was actually a mistake. But I was going to say one of the things that just happened to keep me as you asked that. But one of the things I think maybe to be a little more effective, and I don't know even the process to kind of put this together, but would be almost helpful to kind of have, and maybe I've just missed it and we have it, but kind of a more comprehensive list of like, here's kind of the projects that we have that are really on the radar, big and small, and a little bit of like, this is what would be needed to Mr. Cross's statement, have this shovel ready or have, to be prepared to do this. So as we start to look at where we want to allocate funding or put things together, like we know like, hey, here's 3 projects that would take, we're 80% of the way there. Let's maybe focus our time on that instead. And we can kind of you kind of give a weighted look at some of these of like, this one's a fairly inexpensive project and it wouldn't take us much to be able to do it versus this is really expensive and we have a long way to go to get there. I mean, I think just you talk about being efficient. I just feel like we're talking around in a lot of circles of, we need to know what we're doing to get funding and we need to have funding to know what we're doing. I think we're just chasing our tails and never really going to get anywhere with that kind of approach. So I just think in being effective, it'd be nice to kind of see like, where can we start moving the needle a little bit and what would it take to get there from a work and money perspective?
So maybe even something similar to the work program matrix we've got coming up here later, where it's just like a couple bullet points. Here's where we're at. Here's what phase they're in, and here's what's needed. I think that's a good idea. Carol, what you got?
Unmute myself here. I guess for folks that are new to the committee, I'll try to give a brief synopsis and maybe it'll dust some cobwebs off of the members that have been with us for a while. We put a fair amount of time at the beginning of last year into trying to take, there were a couple pages of problem areas that had been identified from people walking the creek, from residents filling out forms saying there's a problem here. And what we tried to do was create a scoring matrix that would kind of prioritize those objectively. So where are there health and safety concerns? Where is infrastructure threatened and so on. So we tried to make it an objective scoring so that people could understand there's really a long list of projects, but out of those, we've chosen the Triple Meander, the Detention Basin, Evergreen Forest for these reasons that make sense. So we were trying to kind of get some focus that way and, help everybody understand why we were working on what we were working on. At that point, then what it was going to take to fix it was still kind of an unknown. So we've kind of filled in, again, you don't want to do the engineering and the estimating on 70 locations to come back and then say, well, we've spent all our money, even more money, figuring out what the priorities are. So we tried to, kind of get a lot of information into compact format and sort of ran into, a process that sort of withered, and that Dr. Hammer was really a key part of that effort. And his personal circumstances pulled him away from that effort. So kind of, is that big picture kind of thing something we should step back and dust off, or are we kind of past that and just need to recognize we've got a long list, but these are the ones we've moved to the top for these reasons, and kind of assume that step is done and move on to looking for funding. So is the old priority matrix bringing a bell for anybody?
Yeah. Nathan, I see you got your hand back up.
Oh, just kind of a response to that, I guess a little bit for what I was thinking is I think I think we're kind of talking, 2 parts of the same thing there a little bit. Like, it's nice to have those. These are the high priority ones. We weighted those, but at the same time, if we're continuously hitting roadblocks on those things, it's nice to have, it would be nice to have that more higher level, like holistic view of it to say like, look, we're it's going to be years to get to this project to fix this, because of we're going to have to submit for funding, we're going to have to do this, we're going to have to get engineering in. So it would be, I think, helpful to then kind of take that step back and say, well, here's some places we could maybe do something. And again, I'll kind of keep back to the same statement. Otherwise, we're just going to sit here every month and keep talking about the big projects we really wish we could do, but we're never going to really actually do anything. And it'd be nice to be able to kind of see some traction made.
Mr. Ottenberg.
Yes, I joined the task force when I joined the city council back in June or July of last year. I don't think I've seen that matrix that Co-Chair Holthouse is talking about. And maybe there's some other on the task force that haven't seen it either. Maybe it would be a good idea to send that out again, since that does seem to prioritize based on previous discussions where we may want to focus our time first. And it might, and I guess I'd look for input on this, it might serve us well to take a look at that listing again and then possibly pick the starting point from that list. And then per Mr. Cross's comments, get something in place with the engineering done. And once we know what the cost then would be to fix that, take that first step and fix that first location, then maybe the funding would be much easier to obtain. I don't know. Maybe I'm off base with those comments, but those are just my ideas.
All right, Mr. Bartlesmeyer.
Yeah. As for kind of talking with residents engagement, I think it kind of piggybacks on the Mr. Hopper's comments a little bit, or I might be pulling in a different direction, but more information that's not as dense. I know we have the e-newsletter goes every week, and there is a blurb in there about the Watershed Task Force, and it directs you back to websites. But on there is basically everything that we've been presented, which is pretty dense information and takes a while to read through. If there's any way to present, especially residents, with a more streamlined version, like Mr. Hopper was saying, something that's a little streamlined, says these are the major projects we've got, list of them, maybe an estimated cost we're looking at, estimated time frame or no estimated time frame, just something very simple, where people can be aware of what's going on. Social media blasts about what's going on with certain projects, and even one farther down the road where you get to it, where if we do eventually start fixing these projects, do we look in the possibility of, do you put up a sign at the completion and say project completed through the Watershed Task Force?
Or maybe even put up a sign before it gets started so people can see that that's a critical space to look at.
Yeah.
I like it. Carol, what you got?
Kind of putting some of the things that have been said together. I'm wondering if maybe sort of dusting off that priority matrix idea for the detention basins and, trying to take out of the, 2 million or whatever it would be to do all of them, getting that down to here's where we're going to start and why. That might have, and cost being a piece of that is, we pick these because they have a moderate amount of impact and they're, lower cost or whatever it would be. But I think, helping people understand it's a long list, but here's why we're working on what we're working on, is a piece of, where you can get to kind of those bullet points where you don't have to go through the whole matrix to kind of understand here are the criteria and here's what we're working on and why. But I think one of the challenges, and actually it was Mr. Sturman that went back and forth with me, sharing his perspective on, I think it was a letter we were writing to the Evergreen trustees. And, he raised a good point of it can be difficult to sort of say, hey, these problems are really significant and there's, big ticket things that need to be done. And then when people say, so what do we do? And it's like, well, waiting for money. So I think if we could put that, kind of tie the community engagement to some specific realistic things, which are probably, listening to this conversation, it seems there's kind of some movement towards maybe it's picking some detention basins and getting some momentum built in those areas that maybe that's where all these things kind of come together. So that's me off the top of my head, late to the meeting with technology challenges. So feel free to counter arguments are probably not only appropriate, but can only improve on my thought process tonight.
Ms. Donaldson.
Well, when I hear all that's going on in Wildwood with erosion and the watersheds, it's overwhelming for me listening to it. And it just made me think about, I have a niece who is a very successful social media influencer, and it's regarding saving our planet. And when you start thinking about saving our planet from pollution and plastics and so on, it's so overwhelming. It's hard to fathom that we can actually do that. And she's brought it down to a very small human level where she's teaching people every day how to do it on a small micro level and then working to a macro level. And it's very effective, and she's supporting herself in a major way doing this. So I think you tend to lose people when you go in that major way, and you got to get it down to a level where they can understand it. So and not because the residents can't comprehend it, it's just there's a lot going on in the world right now. And I think people are overwhelmed. They're worried about their kids going to school and the school shutting down and COVID in general and on and on and on. So when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking, how do we make it where they can understand it better? Maybe have a small part in it, get people moving in a direction where they want to be part of it. Is it something as simple as educating them what to do and what not to do to add to the problem? I think it has to be a grassroots campaign and not just go, we have to fix this big problem and we don't have money and it's going to take years. I think that would be really effective and get Wildwood residents involved in it.
I think that's not a bad idea. I've kind of thought, I don't know if you guys know what geotagging is, but I've kind of wondered if we could put a small signage. I live off West Glen Farms, so basically right at the corner of Manchester and West Glen Farms, there's a sign of some type of, like, I've never actually read the full thing, but it's like a stormwater readiness sign saying, here's some work that we did because, when the weather comes, the road's not going to flood or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, from a city perspective, guys, what is there? I mean, I don't think that signs like that are particularly expensive. I don't know what the regulations would be in terms of us erecting them and kind of allowing people to go on a little journey to see what is going on and how part one is connected to part two. And so it is all wrapped around. I mean, I remember when Mr. Vunich and Carol and I spoke to the Evergreen Forest folks, and it was like, where do you think the water goes off of your roof? Like, and the answer was like, I don't know, to the drain in the street. And then I don't have to worry about it anymore. So I think just kind of giving people a very base level of education that this stuff is all linked together. And there's little things that maybe can be done. And maybe those little things are just knowing that it's there. And so when they're presented with the option of, hey, we got to pay for this stuff in some way, and that's going to be, an extra 14 cents or whatever it is per person, that's how it works. So I don't know. I mean, Rick, I know like street signs are very expensive. That's not the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, do you guys know how much these signs even like little signs, how much does stuff like that cost?
Well, just your basic street sign is really not that expensive. You're talking about $100 or something like that. It's not too expensive. The major highway signs, different story, but the ones that we typically install on the streets are really not that expensive by and large.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe that's something to look into. Okay. Does anybody else anyone else have anything to add or any more thoughts on what we can do to get the residents more engaged in this? I mean, I think, we've talked a lot about it, social media, things like that. Carol, what you got?
Well, it just, we've talked about social media and, there certainly are a lot of outlets there. I think if we start looking at, kind of to Debbie's point, those sort of micro things you could encourage people to do, it can be as simple as plant some trees, install a rain barrel, all of this isn't rocket science or, hard to comprehend. But I think what we've lacked is sort of that influencer and the resource that says, that's my job and I do it well and I've got time to do it. And,
Right.
we were kind of dabbling that a little bit, when city staff changed and we kind of lost some continuity there. And I just, I think that's a reason. That's not maybe a full-time job, but it's not a 5% job either to do that well. Cause I think it's, keeping it fresh and keeping it consistent is a piece of it from somebody who knows, this much about it. So I wonder if, some of our limited budget maybe should be spent in engaging some sort of, social media help that we pay for, putting that into the budget as a resource we need to add to the team.
Marketing.
And again, city staff, please do not take this as any kind of a critique. You all work long and hard and do a great job, but you just run out of hours in the day. So, and I hate to suggest, here's another great thing we could do when I'm already getting, agendas on Sunday nights. And
Here's another great thing we could do. Travis, get right on that and tell us when it's done, please.
Thanks, Mr. Furman.
and as soon as we tell him what he's already supposed to do that he doesn't need to do as a result, I'm sure it will get done.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think those are all some really good ideas. How about let's talk a little bit about the upcoming Lawn and Garden Summit. I don't know, Lauren, did you want to talk about that, or is that you?
Yeah, that's actually a really great segue because it's community engagement and public education at the event. So I can give just a brief update for those of you that weren't at the council meeting, but this event is now entirely outdoors. All of our partner organizations are in individual pop-up tents. Lectures are occurring outdoors as well with limited seating, so we are encouraging people to bring their own lawn chairs. Our farmers market manager has successfully booked some coffee and some donuts and is working on a couple of other options as well. We are asking people to wear masks and socially distance. And so I'll just give, since I've talked about this on a lot of other committees, but not this one in a while, I'll just give you a rundown of the other partner organizations because some of these are overlapping on topics that are helpful to this committee. So we have Babbler State Park with MDNR will be present. Friends of Bellevue is present, Goats on the Go, Great Rivers Missouri Master Naturalist Group, Department of Conservation / Rockwoods Reservation, Missourians for Monarchs. They're an umbrella organization. They represent 50 total organizations, and so they're also representing a pollinator network as well. Haven't heard back from Mo Prairie Foundation. I hope they can make it this time. They were planning on being at the canceled event, but they specialize in native plantings, and those native plants can absorb up to 7 inches of rainfall in one storm event. And so being able to direct them to that booth would be helpful. The St. Louis Science Center has confirmed they will be doing kid and family friendly things and focusing on their grow exhibit, which does agriculture. St. Louis Audubon Society has confirmed. Waiting on Master Gardeners and Extension to confirm presence and soil intake. Three Rivers Beekeeping Club, Wild Ones, and St. Louis Community College Horticulture Department. And then I also wanted to let you know what topics are going to be presented on. So we have Composting 101 by the Missouri Botanic Gardens. These are all 30-minute presentations. Deer Resistant Planting, 6th grade outdoors. All Red Bees are doing Beekeeping 101. Wildwood Tree Service, and this one's important to watershed erosion, invasive honeysuckle removal strategies and techniques. So when people come to the watershed erosion booth and they say, what can I do to make it better? You can say you can start by removing invasive species that are along the creek beds and on your property, and then point them to the lecture series and the a booth that the tree service has. Perennial shrub and spring maintenance, Pasiglia's Nursery and Garden Center, planting natives, heat, drought, and water tolerant species, papilla and perennials. tips on cultivating a healthy garden, Wildwood Family YMCA, and water and integrated pest management for home gardeners from Far Greenhouse. And so there's going to be lots of tents if you were counting vendor booths, partner organizations that I listed, and the businesses. And so the city will have one where we'll have water and we'll represent the community garden, kind of a welcome booth, and then you all will have your own pop-up tent where we can have the banners and hopefully that stream table. If not, if Rick is still on here, maybe you can source one through him. So I'll be trying to help out and run around like a chicken missing a head all day. So I probably won't be volunteering for this particular booth, but we'll certainly be around. And as soon as we get updated flyers, I'll email it to your committee chairs, Councilmember Farmer and Ms. Holdhouse, so that she can send it out to you guys. And that will include some social media stuff.
Awesome.
Did I miss anything? I think that,
nope, that was pretty comprehensive. I think
that
it's
covered it.
going to be a good event.
Yeah. It's almost like you've given that spiel once or twice before, Lauren.
It is, but it's going a little bit quicker now with everything. So the nice thing is too is when people come to your booth and they're learning about what to do about erosion, you can also say and get involved in these partner organizations. So you can point them to the Master Naturalist organization, which requires community service hours for things like honeysuckle cutback. You can point them to the Master Gardeners, which requires community service hours and helps with education and teaches people how to plant effectively. So there's some good opportunities to help have that education component lifted from you guys a little bit. But a great time for chairs and volunteers to visit the booths and pick up brochures, gather links to websites, things that we can keep on our website for a how-to section. And one more thing too, so when I talked to the Botanic Gardens today as well, one thing I just had clarified to me is that Shaw Nature Reserve is not only part of the Botanic Gardens, but also separate. And so they may or may not have their own booth. And we're clarifying that. But for sure, the Botanic Gardens is doing a lecture and we'll be there.
Great. All right.
I just wanted to note, I have reached out to the Corps of Engineers. Rick Archeski indicated they had a stream table. And I apologize again for not hearing at the beginning, but one of my assignments at the end of last year was to, see what it would take to purchase one. And when I dug into the cost of getting one, considered that you also not only need the stream table, you need somebody with some expertise on doing the demonstrations, and looking at that we didn't really have a big book of events that would be using it for. It didn't seem responsible to tie up natural resources and space and city budget with purchasing one. So I'm working on partnering with somebody that can provide that as part of our booth. So starting with
MSD might have one. MSD might have one.
When I was doing my homework, Rick Archeski was had a couple of places to start, and I'm working. If I exhaust that list and haven't gotten anywhere, I'll cast a wider net, but including apparently Rick said you could probably build one for $200 to $500. So worst case, I'm going to recruit a volunteer that is downstairs right now. So
all right, let's move on to the matrix of work program items for the year. I don't know if everybody got a chance to look at it. I don't know that we need to go through each one, obviously. But I don't know, Mr. Vunich, is there anything in particular you wanted to point out in here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not really. I touched upon the bid proposal from Wilson Hydro for the design, engineering, and bid package. That was probably the highlight. That's being reviewed by our Department of Public Works and our city administrator, along with the Department of Planning. We'll have some more information on that probably at the February meeting to give you some updates. But if there are any questions regarding the matrix or anything associated with it, sure Mr. Brown, Mr. Cross, or I, along with Mr. Newberry and Ms. Ripito, be glad to try to answer them. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. I don't see anybody popping up with any questions, so that's good. I think we can, it actually looks like we've kind of addressed a bunch of these different work program items, moving bed load, slow deterioration, things like that. Joe, was there anything in particular you wanted to point out in there? I mean, we've got some of the basins identified, it looks like.
Mr. Chair, not really. I think the next item is the banners.
Okay. Yeah, so I've got, actually I'm on a different computer tonight, so I don't have the banners in there, but I did send one over to Carol, I think, and Joe, and Steve, there's one of them. So we can do something like this. Thanks, Travis. And what this one does is it really, it's kind of hard to see in here, obviously, but all of the blue that you see in there is it really kind of highlights the interconnectedness of all of these different waterways, although there's several, obviously, they all kind of wind up going to the same place, and in one way or the other, they're very connected. And when you look at a map of our city like this, you know, it looks like there probably aren't too many properties in the city that aren't pretty closely connected to any of these things. So I think pointing things like that out, I think obviously using QR codes and things like that to help move traffic to different places and get people looking at what's going on will be a good first step. And then I do think, you know, as we were talking about earlier, like getting an activity of some kind, you know, I know, I think that there's been kind of a varying level of success with like the snowman hunt that the WBA does every winter, but something similar to that in terms of, you know, hunting for different waterways and things like that. I think it, you know, getting people involved will help them move that way. So that's my thoughts on it. Yes, sir. What you got, Mr. Berger?
Just curious if maybe potentially on a digital landing page through the QR code or something, if that might be a good place, you know, not to serve as a scare tactic, but simply to raise awareness about the severity of some of the issues that we've got going on. If we could maybe highlight some of the pictures or, you know, the sites that we've identified as priority for public viewing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great idea. I was actually going to kind of talk offline with Joe and Steve about what the rules and regulations are in terms of a website. I mean, I think that I personally am on our city's website a lot, and it is not particularly intuitive or easy to figure much out on it. So I would love to be able to do something simple. I'm happy to build the site that, you know, for no money. You don't have to pay me. I'll just do it. Where, you know, we can put some pictures and highlight some things up there. I just want to make sure with the guys that we are properly able to do that without, you know, I don't know, violating any rules or whatever it is. I don't know, I mean, I don't know, Steve and Joe, if you guys want to add anything to that now. I mean, a website and a landing page don't seem to be a big deal.
No, and among us, Travis is clearly the expert in that sort of thing. And so having a landing page, and we're going to have a landing page for the internet. You know, so again, Travis is the resident expert on that sort of thing. I will say, and on a longer term perspective, you are absolutely correct, Mr. Farmer, in that our website in total is a little difficult to navigate and so forth. I have engaged the services of a marketing firm that is helping me on a number of projects and press releases, the North Point development, the strategic plan, et cetera. I have just commenced conversations with them about a new website. So that's on our list to look at, because the mayor and as well as a number of council members have expressed concern that our website could be a little bit better. And so that's a little longer term perspective, but we can certainly put a landing site on our website. Travis, don't want to speak for you, put words in your mouth, but you make things look that are probably very, very difficult. You make them look easy. So I'm kind of saying we can get it done, but if I'm all wet, speak up.
Well, that's okay. I'll touch base with Travis. We'll get it figured out. I mean, I think kind of I'll look and see what is available and all that kind of stuff. We'll get it sorted. That won't be a big deal. All right. Is there anything else anybody's got pressing that they want to discuss while we're all here together? Any other matters that are popping up on anybody's heads? I think we've got a lot of things to certainly think about and get organized. Yes, sir. Mr. Delante. You're muted. You're muted, Mr. Delante. We can't hear you.
Hey, Paul. Paul, you have to press unmute.
How you doing now?
There we go. Nice. Now we can hear you.
Procedural question. All of the business about what to work on and the engineer and studies and that kind of thing. I'm just kind of at a loss, like, how does something get acted on? How does somebody make a motion to say something like, let's pursue hiring an engineer to look at something? How does that work?
So normally, as we would just kind of go through the meeting, if something pops up, and in some cases we need to have motions to move things forward, in other cases we don't. So like when we were engaging the engineer, before we engaged the engineers, we gave our kind of group consent to do that, and then in a lot of those cases that consent then moves forward to the city council and we take it up at a meeting. So in many cases it's like, I'd like to engage an engineer to do X, Y, and Z, but whatever that work is, it's not going to exceed this amount of money. That's the amount we're cool with spending, and then we pass that along to the wider council.
Okay, I understand that. So, but from the perspective of this group, how does that get initiated? For example, what happens? It seemed to be that there seemed to be general consensus, something about an engineer, whether it be for the smaller project or the larger project or whatever. And I guess I'm just confused about, well, how does that happen?
I mean, I guess, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of the engineer, like we've already engaged, and we have engineers already working on a lot of this stuff. We approved a lot of that at the end of the 2021 budget. So for instance, we had Dr. Hammer, who is now not working with us anymore. But
Right.
We've got Wagner Associates and Wilson Electric and things like, or Wilson Hydro, sorry, that are working through on a lot of those projects. So like our retention or the detention basin stuff, we've already got some plans for that with some pretty easy things, and we can move that forward pretty quickly, I would say. Am I misspeaking there, Mr. Vunich?
Well, certainly we've got a good start with the report, and Mr. Wagner actually did prioritize some of the detention basins that he believed would have the greatest impact. So I guess what I would say is how things get started is you all give Rick, Steve, Melanie, Travis, and I an idea. We'll research it, bring it back at the next meeting. And if it's a good idea, we ask you to basically provide the direction.
Okay, like kind of clears it up for me a little bit. I just am still a little unclear how I'm concerned, like Mr. Rambo and Mr. Ottenberg, how do we move things forward instead of just kind of talking around it? And I'm supportive of those people's comments, but I just didn't know where movement came from.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a case like this, I mean, my understanding, and we'll sum it up here in a little bit, but we're gonna kind of have the city figure out what we can do in terms of detention basins, because as Carol mentioned, if the cost is $10,000 or $15,000, we might be able to knock a few of those out relatively quickly with some other things. So getting that sorted, and then figuring, it seems like we do have a relative consensus in terms of doing something is better than doing nothing. And I'm with all of you guys. Waiting around to get $5 million laying in our lap to fix something is not something I'm super excited about doing. So I'm all in favor of moving little pieces to get this thing going forward. So as we kind of go back through the data and figure out what were those critical basins that were pointed out, and what does the fix look like on those, spending, if we have $100,000, I don't know that spending $100,000 on one project is as effective as fixing $10,000 basins, something along those lines.
Okay,
Carol, what you got?
I was gonna, I don't know that it's ready for a motion, but I guess when Joe says, we're gonna draw back and look at things, if they could take the city budget, kind of deduct what's already committed for the geological survey, USGS survey, commitments we've got in place, some reserve that, stuff always comes up, and take those detention basins and sort of say, okay, we've got, 100,000, 80,000, 50,000, whatever it is, and kind of come back with that list of, if we're going to spend this money on detention basins, here's where we'd start, and here's what kind of, capacity would be talking, and is, if it's enough to have a huge impact, buy us some time in a significant way with the triple meander and, Wilson Hydro's experience, maybe we focus along Cox Creek. If we're not going to be able to, do enough to make that kind of a difference in that area, maybe we would instead look at, let's do something in Cox Creek, but also do something in maybe a watershed where there isn't serious erosion now, and where we can maybe prevent that from starting to look like Cox Creek 5 or 10 years down the road. So, kind of if we've got that budget, what would the, what projects would the experts recommend we proceed with? So kind of let's resource constrain it by what's, reasonable, and focus on detention basins, and maybe get a recommendation of where we can get the most bang for our buck. And then I think, to your point, Mr. Delaney, maybe that's something we can then put into a motion and, forward to City Council at the next meeting.
Yep. Okay. Anything else anybody would like to ask, or any other thoughts or concerns, any of that stuff? All right. Our next meeting is towards the end of February 23rd. So you can update your calendars accordingly. We'll get obviously the agenda and thing out as we get closer to that. Carol, is there anything you wanted to sum up this evening with?
I promise I will go back and listen to the whole recording of the meeting and finish up my homework, and just hope you're all having a good and reasonably healthy start to 2022. I know a lot of people who have gotten this most recent strain of COVID, but it seems to be, knock on wood, most of the folks I know have come through it, without serious consequences. So hope the same can be said of all of you and your families.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, I would be looking for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make that motion.
All right, Mr. Ottenberg and Mr. Rambo seconds. Excellent. Non-debatable. All those in favor of adjourning the evening for this evening, please say aye.
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 All right. We'll see you guys all next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Back to painting my library.